Good morning, everyone, and welcome to our Adults Select Committee. If we can just go round and introduce ourselves. My name is Councillor Brown. I'm Vice Chair of this committee, but will be chairing for this meeting. Thank you.
I'm Hazel Eilert, Scrutiny.
Richard Williams, Democratic Services.
Mark Howcroft, Assistant Head of Finance.
Tyrone Stokes, Finance Manager for Social Care and Health.
Ian Bakewell, Housing and Communities Manager.
Julie Nicholas, New Homes Manager at Monmouthshire Housing Association.
Shirley Wigham, Housing. Councillor Roger Harris, Chrysanthemum Ward, Abergavenny, and member of this committee.
Martin Grokert, member for Lansdowne Ward in Abergavenny, and I'm also a member of this committee.
Jane Pratt, member for Llanelli Hill, Clydach and Gilwen, and member of this committee.
Sheila Woodhouse, member for Growfield Ward in Abergavenny, and member of this committee.
And Councillor Paul Pavia, member for Larkfield and Chepstow, and a member of this committee.
Thank you. Could we now have the apologies for absence, please?
Yes, Chair. Apologies from Councillors Edwards, Dimmock and Blakeborough.
Could I also add the apologies of Julie Boothroyd, who's got a hearing this morning and has to be there.
I think Councillor Val Smith has just come in, so if you want to introduce yourself. Thank you.
Yes. My apologies, Chairman, for being late. I'm here as an observer. Councillor Val Smith, Llanbaddock Ward.
Thank you. So for the apologies for absence that we've covered now, and then now, is there any declarations of interest? Presumably not, is there? Or we could deal with it as and when. Public open forum is the next bit, and obviously it doesn't look as if there's any members of the public here. So if we move on to the fourth item, which is scrutiny of the revenue and capital monitoring. So if we can have the report from Tyrone Stokes and Mark Howcroft. For Tyrone, first of all, thank you.
Hello, I'm here today to present you with agenda item 4, which is the period 1 financial outturn for 2018-2019. The report is based on month 2 actuals, but in terms of social care, this may only be at best for the majority of the budget being 1 month's worth of actuals, so it's just for you to note that, but it does give a good indicative figure at this stage on where we think our financial outturn will be for the end of the year. If I draw your attention to section 2, and that's the recommendations, and the first one is for you to consider point 2.1, and that's a net revenue forecast overspend of 471,000. The capital outturn spend and position, and 2.3, the use of reserves, but I'll go through those as I start taking you through the report. On page 2, section 3 illustrates the revenue forecast breakdown, and for social care and health as a whole is shown a £176,000 overspend. But if I break that down for the budget portfolio that sits under your select, the adult services budget position at month 2 is shown an underspend of £124,000. If I take you to the commentary on page 7, the majority of the adult services forecast underspend originates from the community care budget, so that covers all the domiciliary care outlay for the directorate, the residential nursing placements, and staffing for social care teams in the main. Page 10 illustrates savings and tracks progress at month 2, and those were the savings that featured as part of the medium-term financial plan process. For social care, the savings total £925,000, of which for the adult select portfolio, that totalled £653,000 of that to be met. At month 2, we are proposing that we will meet £880,000 worth of those savings. For the adult select portfolio of the £653,000 savings, we are expecting to achieve 638,000, so a small shortfall of 15,000. Page 13 details the capital position. For adult services, we have a very little in way of a capital budget. However, it does give you the full budget for the council for your consideration. The reserves position is detailed on page 16, and the reserves implication for the council is set out in section 3.8. In terms of the social care budget, if I was to highlight any issues to you, it would be that in terms of the underspend and originating from community care, it does rely on some income streams from sale of properties, and those are sporadic, so we can't count on that as a long-term funding solution moving forward. It's just quite opportune at the moment. The housing market is quite buoyant, so those people that we can secure a charge against their properties, we are seeing quite a quick turnaround within 3 months. We are seeing the properties are being sold, and we can try and capitalise on those charges that are accruing against those properties. I'm happy to take or field any questions that you have in terms of the month 2 forecast that's been presented to you today. Thanks.
Councillor Grocott.
I don't really want to comment on the wider issues here because you've brought this monitoring report to Children and Young People's Committee previously. I think at this point it's pleasing to see we're on track. But I'm wondering, crystal ball gazing is always a very dodgy exercise, isn't it? But I think there can be fewer areas of potential expenditure than adult services in the long term in a county like Monmouthshire that are going to be under more pressure. We're always being told here and in other fora that we're an ageing population, that Monmouthshire, perhaps more than other neighbouring authorities, has an age profile which is at the top end there. In the longer term, are you satisfied that officers will be able to carry on doing their duty of care to our elderly population?
It is a good point that you've made, Councillor. It is hard to try and get a crystal ball and try and see into the future. We have got ageing demographics, and unfortunately with Monmouthshire, when we do get funding from Welsh Government, when it is put through the older person's funding formula, we do see ourselves at the bottom of the 22 local authorities when it comes to allocation. The majority of the budgeted savings within adult services comes from our practice change agenda. We've got a final year next year, and we've got to find another £536,000 for the 1920 medium-term financial plan. It is a challenge, but we have got good officers out there that do look at innovative ways of providing care to make sure there's no one in the community that's left with any unmet need. A number of things that support that. We've got a Gwent Wild Frailty programme. We've got negotiations with external care homes, our domiciliary care market as well. We are boosting our in-house domiciliary care market just to make sure that no one is left vulnerable. But again, it's how far can we keep on absorbing that squeeze. It is very difficult is trying to predict at that point where we get to ageing demographics, reduction on funding, and when we actually do meet that perfect storm. But at the moment, like I say, for this year, we are anticipating that we will meet our budget. And like I say, next year, we have got to bear in mind that we have got another £536,000 we've got to take out of this adult select portfolio of budgets going into next year's budget round.
Did you want to come in, Mark? Is that all right, Councillor?
I'd like just to come back, but let Mark speak first.
Yeah, okay, thank you.
I was just going to provide a corporate-wide context to this. That I acknowledge that actually there is a more elderly demographic, and actually, if the numbers are going up, the situation is a bit fragile at the moment in that the savings in community care are largely compensating for the additional volatility and pressures within the children's services, so that within a social care directorate they're consuming their own smoke. Do I think that's sustainable? Well, I think probably there's already recognition at central government level and Welsh Government level about the fragility of social care funding. Just this morning on the news there was a report about £10 million finding its way to Wales to support adult social care. I think that's very welcome. Helping us plan longer term. Actually, a one-off amount probably isn't as useful as maybe a recurring amount through the settlement, but I'd be foolish to turn it down, if you like. But where this is going to go longer term, I mean, Welsh Government have got tax raising powers now. They have been speaking about whether they're to put 1%, 2% on income tax and provide resourcing more generally across the piece for public sector. But you'll note that in any extra resourcing next year, they've chosen to provide that largely whole scale to the health sector, and no one can disagree with that. But actually, I can see some pinch points and log jams around that in terms of providing money to the health service and not being able to facilitate people outside of care or health as a consequence.
Did you want to come back quickly,
Yeah,
Councillor Grocott, and then Councillor Pratt, please? Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Just very briefly, I think I do have a concern in the longer term. To illustrate where I'm coming from, I was in a meeting with Claire Marchant just before she left for Pastures New. We were with the Social Care Inspectorate. And she was obviously a bit jumpy at the start of the meeting, and halfway through she got a message, and it was to say that one of the biggest social care providers in Wales had just managed to restructure to keep itself going. We're not just looking at the difficulties faced by local authorities here, are we? There's so much domiciliary care now out in the private sector, and they're struggling to make their ends meet as well. And so part of the reason why I asked the question was longer term fears that our partners in the private world are equally under pressure. And so I think that's a very good thing that certainly senior officers in our social care organisation here are working so closely with those private providers, and I think that's a model of really good practice for the future. So, thank you, Chair.
If I can just come back, and in terms of that, it is a very good point you mentioned, Councillor, but if I just remind you of a report that came to you, I think it was back February time, where I'm turning the world upside down. Yeah, and that is where, that's what I wanted to kick in around that, because I can see that's what you were searching for. In terms of that, we are actively engaging with our domiciliary care market. That's not only to see if they've got the capacity now and moving forward to service our ageing population, is to make sure they are financially sustainable in the future. And it is a good point you made, because if we haven't got that financial sustainability, that could be the worst outcome for us, where you have domiciliary care providers dropping off due to the fact they just can't make the books balance. Something we are well aware of, and we have got a strategy in place moving forward for that. Thanks.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Pratt.
Thank you, Chair. You know, I'm always very proud to be part of this council and the fantastic officers that we have that manage these budgets. And the thing that concerns me, though, is that you just need one catastrophe to upset this whole scenario. And a previous council I served on, we had a situation where, very, very sad, basically a very sweet man who was a vagrant, but he was kicked to death by two youths in Poole. And we had to put those two youths into very secure accommodation. And it cost the council, literally ran into nearly £1 million to get these two youths cared for, because they had to be cared for in particular circumstances away from where they were living. And I'm just mindful that if we, you know, how robust are we? If we had to deal with a situation like that might cost £500,000, £1 million, how would we cope with it? With the funding that's getting leaner and leaner?
if I just talk generalise on that, and then Mark will kick in further around. We have got a children's services budget. Like you rightly point out, this has already gone to CYP Select. It is that volatility in children's services that we keep on highlighting as part of our outturn report. We've got a suite of unit costs, so we do know what would happen if that instance did occur, and how that would affect our bottom line. Unit costs, if we had someone come into our care, a child come into our care for kinship, staying with grandparents, that could have a low unit cost of 7,000 a year. If you're talking the outer county ones, the cost 500,000, 600,000, 800,000. You only need one of those, and all of a sudden then it just blows all the predictions out. And myself and Mark do keep on mentioning around that volatility within children's services and the effect it could have. But going back to the comment that Councillor Grocott made, it's hard to try and see what's going to happen. None of us got a crystal ball. Conversely, we could have out-the-county children that we can bring back in, and we're looking at strategies moving forward where we can boost the fostering support that we've got to try and see if we can either bring them in-house or whether we can manage that better should that situation arise. Sometimes, though, it is inevitable where they do need to go, unfortunately, to expensive out-the-county secure accommodation.
Yeah, Mark, do you want to? Can we try and keep the conversation more towards the adults? Because obviously the children area is one thing that CYP dealt with, and I suppose we're veering off into the general volatility of the council's budget. So, okay, thank you.
Yeah, with that in mind, I mean, that's the primary purpose I'm here. I mean, Tyrone is very knowledgeable about the adult and the children's side of it, but I can probably provide a corporate context to it. The budgets aren't structured in anticipation of those sorts of costs, although I recognise from time to time that local authorities will experience those pressures. The council does have a number of choices when they occur. Obviously, there are the right placement for those particular individuals in terms of if there are specific ad hoc requirements as a result of the courts, the council can make a request of central government. It does have a council fund balance of £7 million that it can look to utilise in part to smooth some of these peaks and troughs. And it could also use the monitoring, which you'll appreciate is a management tool for bringing a budget in online, that if it knew about those things early enough, could make remedial ad hoc savings through the year to try to compensate for that. So, but you are right, it is the challenge that we live with increasingly in declining settlements, and that volatility is more and more of a risk to local authorities.
Does anyone else want to make a comment? No. Oh, well, thank you very much to the officers for the report there. We've got the recommendations, which is basically on page 1, which talks about there's a net revenue forecast of, obviously this is in the first part of the financial side of 471,000 overspend, but actually in the adult side we're 124 overspend. I think underspend, yeah. I think not overspend, yeah, we're doing much better than that, yeah. Yeah, but we've discussed, Councillor Grocott and Councillor Pratt have discussed the volatility of the budget in terms of future demand for an ageing population, and just one or two cases that can end up costing quite a lot in terms of the overall budget. I did notice that the previous in a certain paragraph in here, it does mention how although at the start we tend to have an overspend, I think it's in 3.14, at the outturn at the end we seem to manage to balance the books. I mean, is that the way that we're going at the moment? Because obviously we've only got this first bit of the report, so if you could just quickly comment on that, thank you.
Yeah, that is basically the general trend, Chair. What tends to happen is that service managers are getting to grips with the the challenges of making the savings that have been approved as part of the previous year's budget round. They're generally quite prudent in the reporting of those until they're manifest, but they also know that actually the pressures that they incur every year are in the forefront of their minds. So more generally, I will see a trend of a worsening position until we get to about month 7, month 8, where actually the senior leadership team will put remedial action in place there to bring it back. And in that regard, that's why I was suggesting that the budget monitoring being a management tool to influence the outcome that you want to bring. It's very much that, obviously, if we were underspent at this point in time, there wouldn't be a need for those interventions. And you can see that in the table in 3.14 that actually it's commonly the case that the first period is poor, and then gets better through the years. I happen to think that probably there's a degree of optimism bias on some of the areas in the report at the moment. That means that month 7, i.e. period 2, will be slightly worse than month 2. That's around areas of children's services for the very reasons that we talked about earlier, and also the alternate delivery model, the tourism, leisure and culture aspects. It wouldn't be intuitive to me that in the conversations they're having with members about the outsourcing of tourism, leisure and culture, that the size of the pressure to manage within tourism, leisure and culture is only £58,000. But we have asked and rechecked that forecast, and I suspect that there is a half-life to some of this information, and we will get you the month 7 as soon as possible to give you an update on it.
Can I move that we accept the recommendations?
Yes,
Chair?
I think that would be a good idea to accept the recommendations as outlined on page 1. If everybody's happy with that. So if we can now move on to the... Just wait for the officers to leave. So if we can now move on to the next item, which is the review of the Mardy local lettings policy. And I think Shirley Wigham is going to... Oh, no, sorry, it's Julie Nicholas from Monmouthshire Housing who's going to give us a presentation on this. Thank you.
Thanks very much. It was just pointed out to me about 10 minutes before I came in that we actually made the BBC News today with our presentation today. It's quite a nice social housing boost by choice of tenants, and hard to let social housing can be boosted by giving priority to the over 50s or people with jobs, officials in Monmouthshire have said. So that's on the website today if you want to have a look. So my name is Julie Nicholas. First of all, apologies for not being John Keegan. He's unavailable today, so you've got me. Thank you. You're very kind. So I'm going to take you through the local lettings plan, or the LLP as we tend to refer to it, for the Mardy. I understand that some people here are very aware of it and others maybe not so I'll just start at the beginning if that's okay. So the local lettings plan was introduced in 2015 with the aim of tackling issues in a specific area in the Mardy in Abergavenny. We were looking at higher than average levels of antisocial behaviour, a lack of demand for properties in the particular area, an increasing number of failed tenancies, which is not good for anyone. It's not good for the household that's failing the tenancy, and it's not good for the organisation who has to manage that failed tenancy, and it's not good for the community, because what happens then is you get a higher turnover of properties, what we call in the industry, horrible word, a churn rate, which is not good for a community or for individuals. And then obviously you have increased management and void costs, repairs, getting the properties right, all of that sort of thing. There's also a reputational issue in the Mardy. Talking to people, we were getting higher numbers of refusals, less people bidding on properties. And as everyone knows, reputation can take longer to catch up with reality. So the local lettings plan is aiming to deal with the practical issues, but also the reputational damage in the area. What we had was a congregation, a concentration of people with multiple needs and issues in one area, making it much harder for that area to improve and for people in that area to break the cycle that they were in. So just to give it a bit of strategic context, North Abergavenny is recognised in the latest population needs assessment as an area experiencing high levels of deprivation. So the Mardy Locals letting plan is actually only covers 154 properties. That's across 4 streets. I do have more of a breakdown, but the vast majority of those properties are 2-bedroom apartments. St Andrew's Crescent, St George's Crescent, St David's Road and Cluny Lane. And the LLP currently gives priority, well, as the BBC headline said actually, to applicants who are either in full-time employment, that's more than 16 hours per week, or who are aged over 50. And sorry, just to give you a bit of context there as well, Monmouthshire Housing actually has 3,000, just over 3,500 homes, so we're talking about 154 properties only. So what we've seen, having had 3 years pretty much of the LLP now, is significant improvements, and it very much is it is performing well against the policy intent. We've seen a huge shift in the socio-economic profile. I'll talk to you a bit more about that in a moment. We've seen increased demand, and we've seen decreased churn rate, that turnover of people leaving and coming in, which is what we wanted. However, there are issues that persist. We still see lower demand than for other areas, including for comparable areas. So we take an area in Caldicot that has a high concentration of 2-bedroom apartments as a comparable area. It still does have significant antisocial behaviour, although that has reduced, and there's still reputational stigma. So we're still seeing people say that they don't want to move into a property because of the area that it's in, because of what they've heard, not necessarily the reality. And tenant satisfaction levels do remain lower than for other areas. So just take you through... This is John's favourite chart because it shows the socio-economic change that's happened as a direct result of the local lettings plan, and it's pretty impressive, I think. What we're looking at here is, in terms of unemployment, 50% of the residents in that local lettings plan area were unemployed in 2015, and that has reduced down to 33% in March 2018. These are snapshot figures. We've obviously then seen the unemployed rate reduce consequentially, and because of the nature of the properties, the apartments, they're general needs apartments, we have quite a fairly low number of retired people in that area anyway, because Monmouthshire's got a lot of sheltered housing and what we call specialist housing for older people. So, I mean, it's a pretty impressive impact that the LLP has had on that area. My apologies, this is a snapshot for 2017, not 2018, that's wrong. But I just wanted to give you the view, because the last slide was all about the LLP. So this slide is comparing the local lettings plan area, those 4 streets, with the general Monmouthshire housing economic profile. So you can see we've got much higher numbers of retired people in our homes generally. But the significant thing here, I think, is that those working now are at 50%, which is actually higher than our general. However, that's because we don't have those OAP properties and the sheltered housing. But the unemployed, although it has reduced, it is still higher than our general number. So I think we need to, although this policy is doing really well in terms of it's meeting the outcomes and the objectives, there is still some work to do. In terms of antisocial behaviour then, and I know as councillors in the Abergavenny area that you will be getting people talking to you about this and coming forward, because antisocial behaviour can, have massive impact on people's lives. We saw a huge drop between 2014 and 15-16, the first year that the LLP was introduced. I have to put it in the context of a lot of other work going on. The Mardy Task Force was brought together at that time, working with the police, working with the local authority and so on. A lot of intensive work was done. We did see an increase the following year, however, it has decreased. These are small figures, so it's difficult to give trends on these figures, but I think it's fair to say that we have historic antisocial behaviour that continues, that we are trying to address and manage, but generally the trend is that it's decreasing from the highs before the local lettings plan, but that's not to say we've got rid of it. Demand. So demand was an issue for us because we had low numbers of people bidding. So if you look here, you'll see that this is about 2-bedroom apartments and the average number of bids that we have. So in 2017-18, we've got 2 lots of bids here. We've got the number of bids in total and then the number of eligible bids, because each property has an eligibility criteria, whether that's about household size or whether that's about people needing certain types of access and so on. So what you can see here is that the local lettings plan area, we have on average 8 eligible bids, and if you compare that to all properties in MHA, that's 15. Eligible bids, but in Caldecott, in a comparable area with those 2-bedroom apartments, we averaged 37 bids. So demand is still relatively low, although I have to say, and in the full report there is more information on this, I'm trying to keep it down to 10 minutes for you, that those 8 bids have doubled what they were before the LLP started. It used to be 4 eligible bids per property. So you can see that demand is increasing because people are starting to think, oh, okay, I do want to live there. I'm hearing better things about the Mardy. The reputation is improving. So again, good news, but still some way to go. In terms of transfer demand, this was a real issue for us, because what we were finding was the number of people living in that area who were actively joining the waiting list to move was significantly higher. And what we want is people who are going to move into homes and stay because they like it, they want to live there, they want to be part of the community. Now, we absolutely get that households change and people move on, particularly 2-bedroom apartments with families, because, you know, people want their home with they want a house with a garden. And also household sizes change and people want to downsize or upsize. However, there is still tremendous demand compared to other areas for people wanting to move out, and that was an issue for us. So what we've seen here is absolutely great news. As you can see, this is the number of new registrations in the area per year, and you can see how it is completely decreasing down to 3.9%, and actually is now lower than than the average MHA. Now, I have to say, this is the number of new registrations per year. There's obviously a cumulative number of people who've stayed on the waiting list. So the number of households on the waiting list in that area is above the average, but what we're seeing is a decrease of new people joining, which is really good news. In terms of tenant satisfaction then, we do satisfaction surveys every other year. So this is the 2015-16 survey compared to the 2017-18 survey. And what you can see here is that satisfaction levels since the LLP have increased fairly substantially. If you look at the satisfaction with the service provided by MHA in the LLP area, that's increased by 8%. That's significant in that 2-year gap. So people are reporting that they're more satisfied. However, if you compare it with the Caldecott area, which has those 2-bedroom apartments, it's still generally a lower level of satisfaction. So we're definitely getting there, but we're not quite there yet. We had significant voids in the LLP. One of the main drivers was about that. Voids are a blight on any area. Nobody wants unoccupied properties. They don't look good. People notice them. And also they're not a good use of our resource. So this was a main driver for us, was to keep those voids levels down. So you can see that we have absolutely achieved that. However, voids still remain almost double the MHA average for that area. So they have come down significantly by almost a third, but again, still some way to go. In terms of successful home seekers, by the band on the home search criteria, you're all familiar, I assume, with bands 1 to 5, which is how we decide the priority need for people on our choice-based letting system. Sorry, this chart's really small, isn't it? I'm not sure I can actually read it myself. So what we're seeing here is a change from the number of people who were in band 2, the higher bands going into the area, to people in lower bands with lower needs. Now, I have to say that we need to understand that this accounts for that socioeconomic change that we're seeing. We're seeing more employed people coming in, etc. And that was the fundamental intention of the LLP. So yes, we're seeing people with lower bands coming in, but that was what we wanted because we had such a high concentration of unemployment and so on in the area. Also, we've just done some snapshots on housing need in the area. There were actually very few people in that band 2B homelessness need seeking Abergavenny as their principal choice. And obviously we understand that homelessness needs in Monmouthshire are not as intense as they are in other parts of Gwent. That's not to say we don't have it. And that's not to say we're not housing people. Actually, our latest statistics show that we're above that quota that we used to use for housing people in that 2B homelessness priority. There are other properties available. We're not saying to people, we're not going to house you. We're just saying we're not going to house you in these 4 streets at this time unless you meet this criteria in terms of age and economic profile. So the good stuff then, just a summary really. We've seen significant positive outcomes as a result of the local lettings plan. We've seen substantial change to the socioeconomic profile, and we've seen increased average numbers of eligible bids for homes. We have reduced the void times, in part because we're not getting that churn rate, but also because more people are bidding, so we're not having to re-advertise because no one has bid on a property, which is what was happening before. When people move in, we're then less likely to apply to move again. They're staying where they are, and we've seen improved tenant satisfaction levels. We've also seen some reduction in antisocial behaviour. But we think there's still more to do, which is why we're requesting an extension to the policy until 2020. Satisfaction levels still remain lower than for a comparable area. Home seeker residents remain higher than for average. Although we're seeing the numbers decreasing, they're still higher than for the rest of the MHA area. Antisocial behaviour continues to be an issue, and bids on the LLP homes, they still remain lower than that Caldecott comparable area. We also see unemployment levels remain higher than MHA average. So our recommendation is to continue to support the socioeconomic performance and reputational improvements in the area by continuing the Mardy LLP to April 2020. And I think one of the things, I had a 20-minute extra commute into the County Hall this morning, and I happened to catch an episode of the Life Scientific with a woman on there who was talking about her life as an ecologist and how in the 1980s she went to Silicon Valley and she was working with the computer industry. And one of the things that she brought to them was that in a healthy ecosystem you have much more diversity, and through that diversity you get strength, you get progress, and you get balance. And what she said to those people in Silicon Valley was, what can you learn from that? How diverse are you? And they all said, we're not actually, and we need to be more. And that's when you started to get all these different systems talking to each other, and it generated this whole new industry that's sort of taken us all forward in the 21st century. And I'm not for a moment saying the Mardy LLP is Silicon Valley in the 80s, but I think that strength in diversity is really important, and that is the policy intent of the local lettings policy. So any questions?
Yes, thank you very much for that presentation. So if we go on to Councillor Harris, because I believe it's in your area.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, this is my ward. There may be 1 or 2 bits of St David's Road flats in actual Mardy ward as opposed to Crisonon ward. But I welcome this report. It's very detailed. It's been analysed properly, and the results of the analysis are in front of us, and we can see that you've come to your conclusions based on evidence, not on what you'd like to see. So going back 5 or 6 years in my ward, there was a lot more antisocial behaviour than there is now. Having said that, considering the demographics, the amount of antisocial behaviour, it wasn't a huge problem. It was mainly low-level stuff. And in each of the roads there, for example, in St David's Road, there was one particular family actually not living in a flat, but next door to another family in the flats that caused absolute mayhem. In St George's Crescent, there were quite a few youngsters and there were drug-related problems in there. Again, in St Andrew's Crescent, there was one particular household, again, that caused absolute mayhem to such an extent that closed-circuit television was put up, and lo and behold, that all disappeared. So it is in the ward a lot better than it was, and the important thing is that it's the residents around the flats in particular that are particularly affected, and I'm not getting anywhere near as many complaints now that I used to. The main complaints now is that the people in the flats have got nowhere to park, and that's common, and that they will persist in putting their recycling and rubbish out weeks before it's due to go out. We're on top of that. That's the main thing. I welcome this, and I certainly recommend that it carries on for another couple of years. I think it'd be madness to stop it now. Thank you, Chair.
Yes, thank you. Very positive. I don't think there's any need to come back on those comments as they're very positive comments. Could we hear from Councillor Grocott now, please?
Thank you, Chair. I'm in the adjacent ward in Lansdowne, and certainly from my own experiences in my own ward, I see many of the same difficulties there. So a couple of points I would like to raise, really. Some months ago now, one of your colleagues was talking to me about closed-circuit television in a similar block of flats in my ward, in the Underhill area, and talking about the success of really a concerted multi-agency attempt to get rid of antisocial behaviour. It would certainly have my full support, because there can be few things worse than living next door or very, very close to people who are constantly making life a misery. And you're quite right, it's one of the things that I hear an awful lot about when I'm knocking on doors in my ward. So, yeah, I would certainly support Councillor Harris and would support an extension for the length of period that you want. However, I'd also like to go on and perhaps ask what happens to those people who find themselves moved out of the flats to make way for the raising economic circumstances. Because at the end of the day, they are people often with children, for whom we as a council have responsibilities, and we as human beings at the end of the day have responsibilities as fellow members of our community, albeit possibly quite antisocial members of the community. But I'd like some reassurance as to what has happened to the people who've moved out to enable this improvement to happen. Thank you, Chair.
Yes, thank you. If you could come back on that, please.
Apologies. I should have put the context of how this works right at the beginning, and I didn't. Nobody has moved out to make way for people coming in. What we're doing is the naturally high churn rate that we had, we apply the criteria to new people coming in. Monmouthshire Housing's got a really low eviction level. I can't actually tell you how many have been evicted from that area, but it would be very, very few. I think we have fewer than 10 evictions a year, to be honest. It's really low. Way lower than anywhere else I've ever worked. But Yeah, so the natural churn rate, as natural voids become available, then we're applying the criteria. So nobody is being moved out because people have their tenancies and they have their right to remain in their home.
Councillor,
If I
sorry,
could
did you want
just
to come
come
back?
back
And
very
then
quickly.
Councillor Pratt, thank you.
Is there any chance then that you could extend this approach to that area which is very similar in the Lansdowne ward, and hopefully equally successfully?
The answer is I don't know, because I've not done any work on the Lansdowne area, but that's certainly something that we can look at in terms of what are the issues, what would be the best way to manage that issue. Perhaps it's a conversation that we could have outside of here, because I'm not familiar with that area. If that's okay, sorry.
Yeah, sorry. If we can hear from Ian Bakewell, please. Thank you.
What you need to be mindful of is you're working within a statutory context. So the housing register is about meeting our statutory duty in terms of the allocation of social housing, monitoring housing need, and we've got certain categories of need that we need to respond to. So it's described as reasonable preference, and their groups such as homelessness, medical needs, welfare, overcrowding, disrepair. What the legislation does allow us is to have these local lettings policies. They can't be permanent, they've got to be temporary. So there is scope to do more, but what you do need to be careful of is moving away from meeting our needs. And these sort of schemes, you're not allowed to. They're not allowed to, I think the word in the use is they're not allowed to dominate the scheme. So.
Yes, thank you. I think basically what we're saying there is that the local lettings policy are an exception, and they need to be kept as an exception. Councillor Pratt, thank you.
Thank you, Chair. And I mean, this is really good to see that things have improved, and, well done for, making a difference here, and obviously improving the quality of life for the people that live there. And certainly, I have friends who live in this area, and they're passionate about where they live, and there's a lot of really good things. I was just saying to Councillor Grocott, there's an excellent Ysgolifeni school, which I went to learn Welsh there in the evenings, and there's a lot of good things to recommend this area. But looking forward, I mean, you say you've got voids and you have empty properties. Do you see fairly not far off a situation where we know now that prices of properties in the private sector are rocketing and people can't earn enough money to afford mortgages, etc. And also rents are going up as well. A time when, this area will change, and it is changing, and you will have, a mix of people which is healthy for the well-being of everybody, and the demographics are improving, that actually these void properties will be filled very quickly.
We don't have much of a problem of filling a void property. Monmouthshire generally has got very few hard-to-let properties compared to other valley areas. What we do have is fewer people waiting for those properties, and so it's seen as so you have less of a waiting time, and you'll have people with higher needs, more complex needs concentrated in that area because they become available more often and less people are competing with them for it. You're absolutely right. Private rented sector rents are going up, and there is more pressure on the market generally. So Monmouthshire has, well, you're aware, a programme to build more properties. We've also got capsule homes that try to bring more intermediate market rents available for people in the area. So there's lots of levers going on to try and manage that housing pressure. But yeah, the market is difficult for people. There's not enough homes for people. We know that. So we're trying to do lots of different things to not only increase housing, but to make those communities balanced and make those communities sort of progress. And you're absolutely right. The Mardy's got a really strong sense of community. it's not all bad at all. Nobody is saying that, you know, really strong sense of community. I mean, we walk around the Mardy regularly. My officers walk around the Mardy. It's, you know, it's lots of green. It's a lovely place to be. So, you know, there's lots of good stuff going on as well. And I think there's a danger sometimes in when you're doing the LLP to just be saying the bad stuff because you're trying to give the evidence. And there are issues. Obviously, there are issues, or we wouldn't have the LLP, but there's also a lot of good stuff going on there.
If we can have Councillor Woodhouse and then Councillor Harris. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Councillor Harris, is your question about this particular subject, or because I'm just going to go on? Yeah, thank you. I just wondered if it was a continuation. I've got a few questions. Where did this LLP come from? It's established here in 2015, I understand, from the information we've received. I'm just wondering where else this has been implemented in Wales, and the success of it. You mentioned it's temporary, because another question I was going to ask was, have you got any plans to do this elsewhere? But that's more or less been answered from Councillor Grocost's point. It's good to see the success of this and the backing of the local member, that people's quality of life has improved because of this. The retired figures, the retirement element sort of puzzles me, because obviously if we get people over 50 coming into the area, that's gone down. But I mean, we should really be seeing an increase in that. If people are happy and content to stay there, that eventually will rise. I notice it's gone the other way. So you said about people moving into sheltered housing, but it still seems in the future, I think we can be looking at an increase in that if this is proved to be successful. But, you know, with 3,500 properties in Monmouthshire, I'm just wondering, are you considering doing this elsewhere? You've compared it with Caldicot. Has that been considered as needing it, or are you saying that Caldicot is the sort of what we're aiming for?
Or if you come back, yeah, thank you.
Okay, so in terms of your first question about where else the LLP is in Wales, so LLPs, they're owned by the council, actually, aren't they? The local lettings plan. Yeah, so they're owned by the council, but obviously the social landlord, whether that's council or housing association, will work with the council to look at what it is. They're time limited and they're neighbourhood specific. So, for example, we do have LLPs on big new build developments. So, for example, we'll apply a local lettings plan to say we want 20% of people in band 2, 20% of people in band 3, 4, 5, you know, we'll do it that way. To make sure that you're getting these balanced communities right from the start. So there are lots of different types of LLP for new properties, for existing neighbourhoods, and you'll apply them according to what you see as the needs assessment and the risks for the area. We don't have anything like this LLP, which is for an existing neighbourhood to tackle low demand and so on, anywhere else in Monmouthshire. And in Caldicot at the moment, we don't have that low demand that would make us want to look at an LLP. But LLPs will be used by multiple local authorities across Wales in some ways. They're targeted and they're time limited, so specifically like that. In terms of the second question around retirement figures, I think that what we're seeing is because we're seeing increased numbers of working families coming into that specific area because of the priority, we're by definition seeing the age demographic. We're as a result seeing the age demographic fall. And what you have with MHA, because we've got sheltered housing and what we call OAP, older persons housing, is that there will be concentrations of older people there. Most of our sheltered housing is in really nice areas and so on, so people will want to move in there. So you'll have concentrations. So I think when looking at the figures, the figure to look at is the employment rates. Are they the same? Because the concentrations of sheltered housing will skew those figures, and they're not quite the same read across, if you see what I mean.
Thank you. Yeah, so Councillor Harris now, please.
Yeah, it's just an observation that I don't think you really mentioned, Julie, the fact that your MHA has put in vast amounts of money on these flats in particular to refurbish the recreational areas and, in fact, the interiors, stairwells, etc. And I can see from going around the ward, for example, on the latter, some of the blocks of flats you go into, you think wow, and others you think wow in the opposite direction. So there has been a lot of refurbishment. It should make it even easier for you to relocate people when they see the facilities that are there. You can only hope that they use them properly.
Yep, sorry. Yeah, I was just trying, somewhere in my full report, I have got a figure on that, but I didn't include it in the presentation, but you're absolutely right. There's been a huge investment in environmental and Welsh Housing Quality Standard works in the area. And like I said at the beginning, this hasn't just been about the LLP. This is about multiple levers going on, working with local councillors, working with police, working with the council, everyone working together, the huge investment on the environmental works, all being done at the same time to try and have this big impact on this area.
Just coming back, I think it's important to mention the local liaison officers, or whatever you want to call them. I get on well with mine. Any problems, she's there to help me sort it out straight away. And if other councillors aren't aware that they've got that sort of backup, I know a letter's gone out recently to all us councillors saying who the liaison officer is, and I just recommend that they contact them and have relevant discussions.
Yes, I think unless anybody else has got anything else they want to say, if I could ask a couple of questions. I mean, it seems in general that people are pleased with this policy that seems to be working. I was just wondering whether, if you actually look at the figures on antisocial behaviour, it seems as if it concentrates, I think, on St David's Road. And is there a necessity to apply the policy across the board? And the second question is Caldicot the right comparison in view of the fact that they've got such a high level of people bidding for properties, and it's much higher than the average bids? I think you said that the bids were 8 for these properties and then 15 for basically on average, and then it was I think in the 30s or something like that for Caldicot. So is this the right comparison that's being used? The other concern that I've got is obviously to make sure that this is an exception, because of the fact that private landlords, for example, might want to be selecting on the basis of those in employment or over 50. And obviously, I appreciate that you've got to try and balance the community, but you know, we've got to be careful that stock is available for everybody. Thank you.
Yep. Oh, sorry.
Sorry, did you both want to come back, or?
Yeah. So what I've tried to do is do comparisons with the general housing stock and also the Caldicot stock. The reason that we chose the Caldicot streets is because they're also blocks of 2-bedrooms apartments, so the type of household that will be bidding is comparable. So that was the reason for that. Yeah. So in the full report, I've kind of given both, but just to let you know, that was the reason why. It's the same type of households that will be going for 2-bedroom apartments in blocks. So those are the two areas that we have that situation in. In terms of the antisocial behaviour figures, I think because it's only 154 properties that are included in the local lettings plan anyway, there's obviously the ASB has been moving around, and right now it's higher in one area than another. But the neighbourhood is sometimes the antisocial behaviour is happening maybe outside of certain properties, but the tenants might belong to a certain street. So the neighbourhood is very much, the neighbourhood boundary is very much as it is. And what we wouldn't want to happen is to apply the LLP only to 2 of the 4 streets or 3 of the 4 streets, and then see concentrations of behaviour happening elsewhere as a result. Because we've started the LLP with these 4 particular streets, our preference is to continue, because that's how the neighbourhood approach works.
Yes, thank you. If you want to come back in.
Yeah, just to add to that, I suppose first thing I was going to say is I think it's surprising how different the areas can be, and I think it's quite difficult to actually make necessarily a direct comparisons, albeit some of the principles are the same. And I think the other thing to remember as well is that over a period of time, how communities change, and again, in my time in Monmouthshire, I'm not going to name the communities, but there's particular ones, you know, where, if you like, we've gone through difficult periods, but you know, they've been managed and they've been turned around, and I think it's looking at it from that perspective, and obviously the Monmouthshire Housing, obviously from their own management perspective, will be closely monitoring communities. Obviously, as the council, we do ourselves, you know, through our own community safety arrangements. And lastly, I just wanted to say that again, just as part of our statutory obligations, the policy of Monmouthshire of the council is to rehouse those in greatest need. So again, that's what we do, and that's the basis of the approach that we're taking. And I think your point, you touched on it again. What about our families that are in need? And you know, we do have a lot, but I say there's no concerns or issues around that. You know, I think we've got very, very supportive partners, and I think it works very well in terms of that partnership that we've got. And I think it would be quite difficult to actually say we could make the stock work any better for us. I think you know, it does work very well overall.
Okay, I just wanted to say thank you very much to Julie Nicholas for coming from MHA. I've noticed in the recommendations that the recommendation is to extend it for a further 2 years, subject to review in 1 year, and just wanted to know if you'd be happy to come and do a similar presentation in a year's time to let us know how it's getting on. I think that would be very helpful, just to make sure that we're still on track on this particular aspect. So overall, I think in summary, I think we've had a very positive response, and you know, well done for achieving this turnaround so far. And our questions about the Caldecott comparisons and the local letting policy has been answered. So if you're all happy, we'll move the recommendations, which are on page 37, which is basically to continue this local lettings policy for a further 2 years, subject to a review in a year. Yes, okay, thank you. Do you want to wait a short time while you... Julie, did you want to stay, or do you want to wait a short... Shall I wait a short time while you leave? Yeah, thank you very much then. Thank you. Right, so our next report is the scrutiny of the social housing grant programme, which is on page 65, and Shirley Wigham is going to do that report. Thank you.
Good morning. The purpose of the report is to brief members on the completion of the social housing grant programme for 2017-18 and to seek approval for the new programme for 2018 to 2021. As you can see, we had full spend and managed to get 737,828 additional funding last year. This year we're in now, the 1920 is the last year of the big money. The Welsh Government made 3 years, much more funding available for 3 years to help reach their 20,000 affordable houses target. Next year, we will be dropping down to 1.9 million, and the year after that to 1.6 million, and then on probably back to the 1.2 that we used to have. So,
sorry to interrupt. I've just heard you can't be heard very well. Could you move over to another mic, if that's okay? Thank you. Yeah, sorry, could I ask if you could start again? Sorry about that, thank you.
right, sorry. The purpose is to brief members on the programme for last year and to seek approval for the programme for the next 3 years. Is that better now?
Yes, thank you.
Yeah. So as I said, we spent our full grant last year and we had 737,828 of additional funding. Last year we completed 94 properties. 50 of those were supported by social housing grant and 44 were Section 106 properties. Going forward, it was very successful last year. As I said, we had the 3 years of the large amounts of money. Going forward, I am having difficulty with spend for this year. I think it's very unlikely we'll be able to get additional funding because I've got nothing coming through that I can bid for it. The biggest problem is our housing partners were given all this money, but they cannot find land. They have the real difficulty. And that's become worse now that obviously we're looking at a new LDP. We've got to call out for sites, so people are holding on to land to see if they can get it in the new LDP. So to be able to spend our money, what I've done is MHA have been very successful in buying back properties that we lost on the right to buy. So I've instructed them to buy as many back as they possibly can. And we're looking at 23 to 24 this year, which will take up quite a lot of the grant we have. Those properties obviously are good standard. They're good space standards because they're when they used to build them properly. And it's really good. They're in good areas, so he is buying back as many as they possibly can. They are also buying back additional that we're not grant funding, and they're using those for intermediate rent, as Julie explained, to try and give more of a choice for people. Next year, this year that I'm seeking approval for, we've got 5.4 million that we're trying to spend. We've got Brookside, which should have been completed by now, but there was some problems on site. That will be completed in January. That's 25 new houses in Caldecott. We have a disabled bungalow that we did in Caldecott for a family with 2 disabled children. We've got 8 flats in Garden City Way that Mellon are hoping to start very soon. They should be on site actually this month sometime. We also have a rural exception site in Lantilio Cresceni that the church has made land available. That's for 4 properties. We have been working with the church, the Rural Housing Enabler and myself have been working with the church on a few sites because they are keen to help with the affordable housing crisis. We also have put some money into DIY home buy. When I did the local housing market assessment, it showed that there was a real need to provide lower price housing for youngsters to get a foothold in the market. And because we are concerned about the 20 to 40s not being able to buy a house in Monmouthshire, we have put some more money into DIY, and that works by the person identifies their own property it has to be within certain guidance, the ACG guidance, the same as if it was a new property. And then they get an interest-free equity loan of up to 50% from Mellon Homes. They've done 8 or 9, I think, to date, and they're doing as many of those as they can. I think that's... the only other thing I wanted to point out is in the report, when I did the report in August, the average house price was 298,000. When I looked yesterday, it had gone up to 304, and every time I look, the Monmouthshire average house price has gone up in recent times. just for a comparison, if we look at our neighbours, the average house price in Newport is 193,300, Torvine 168,200, Powys 197, and the Vale, which is the most county like ourselves, is 278. So our house prices really are shooting up above everybody around about us. I also looked at Herefordshire, which is 269,400, and South Gloucestershire is 307, so that's more comparable to the prices that we are having. And I'm happy to take any questions.
Okay, open to the, thank you for the presentation, open to the committee. I think Councillor Grocott and Councillor Pratt put your hands up at exactly the same time, so I'll let you fight between the two of you. Councillor Pratt, thank you.
Thank you very much for that report, and obviously the brilliant work that you do in getting all the funding together to forward this. What I'd like to know is, we're aware that the land isn't available and we haven't met our targets for the amount of land we need for the future. Are we looking at, is the cost of looking at residential sites in our high streets too expensive? Is that, somebody said to me the other day, what about, empty shops and flats above? Is there any appetite for us to look at this as a possibility for the future?
They're more difficult with the social housing grant because of the space standards that they have to be supported. We do look at the empty properties. We have, my colleague Steve Griffiths looks at empty properties. And I have said to him, if you find any that would be suitable for grant, please bring them and we could grant fund them. But we don't really have a huge empty property problem in Monmouthshire, do we? You know more about empty properties than me.
Yeah, I mean, I know you've queried this before, haven't you? And I think it'd be something I'd love to do. Is would be to have a real good go at properties above shops in the high streets. We did ask Charter's development team to have a look at that. Nothing came of that. I think, as I said before, I think the challenges are around the shared access, the services, the fire, and everything. So, and I know the conversation that when Shirley and I went to meet with Charter again, it was around that making it work financially. So, if we could do it, there'd be no argument with it. I'd certainly be up for it. I think it'd be great to actually be able to do that, and that's not to say that we can't revisit it again, but that's been, I think, the stumbling block, making it work financially.
Yes, okay, thank you.
Yeah, and I think, thank you for that, Ian, and I think obviously looking forward, sadly, the high street is under intense pressure, and I think the situation is only going to get worse with the impact of people buying things online. And even looking in Usk, and I quite even noticed walking through Abergavenny, which really has good occupation of shops, has quite a few empty units there. And if you look at the Barclays Bank in Usk, I mean, the good thing about these properties, some of them, is that they're traditional properties, that they've got large rooms. And also, I think it would make continue our town centres to be vibrant and to have a mix of people. And, if people are living within the town centre, then they're able to walk to services and to shops, and it means that there's not such a great need for people to have cars all the time and to get in their car. So I do think it's something we've got to be creative about, but I do appreciate it's expensive to convert these buildings. But moving forward, because of the pressure we're under, I don't think we can just, accept the situation as it is.
What we'll do, we'll take this away as an action from today and a recommendation from the committee and we'll contact all the RSLs again and have that conversation. And I say, we know that they'd be keen. Charter have done it in Newport, albeit under different funding arrangements. But you know, so the expertise and knowledge is there. But we'll make a real point of you know, looking at that again.
Yeah, that was certainly a very excellent suggestion to follow that through and go back to the RSLs to see if they can assist in that. I mean, I do know, being on the planning committee, that there have been flats above shops looked at, but these obviously have been private shops that have had planning permission. But I mean, obviously it's the question of the financial side and possibly the rules, I suppose, in relation to how many units and in terms of affordable housing and those sort of things that might need to be looked at. If I could come to Councillor Grocott and then Councillor Harris. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Just to comment on paragraph 8, really, which is the sustainable paragraph at the end of the report there. And apologies for being a pedant, but it brings out the teacher in me. On line 2 there are 2 spelling mistakes in one line. Schemes is spelt wrong and Hereford is spelt wrong. But the main point I want to make is really to congratulate our officer on the tremendous work that she does in accessing these grants and turning them round into some really nice developments. And that paragraph mentioned Cleesa Brennan, which is in my ward. And when you compare that development to the flats that are round about them, they're a tremendous achievement. And to have identified that little pocket of land, to have identified the money and put the two together, I'd simply like to congratulate you and everyone else that was concerned with that. I think it looks smashing and it certainly enhanced my ward.
Councillor Harris now. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, Shirley's just an expert at grabbing any available money that there is out there, including from other authorities that don't spend it. So keep that up. The major problem, one of the major problems is, again, like the Chair, I'm on the planning committee, and we get a large development and we negotiate for 35% affordables, or however you want to call it. It comes along to the planning committee and we suddenly find the district valuer has had consultations and suddenly it's not viable for the amount of affordable housing that we put on there. And it happens all the time, and it's happening more and more. So Shirley may have in mind so many properties on a particular site that she can spend her money on, and suddenly it's not viable. So certain things are out of our hands, but I'm sure, you know, if the land is out there, you'll find it, Shirley, if you possibly can. One other thing, if you look on page 66, paragraph 4.5, you've got, just above it, you've got 2019-20 allocation 2.567 million, and just underneath 4.5, that's 3.567 million. So there's a million difference there. Which is the correct one? It's on page 4.5. Paragraph 4.5. 5.4 for 18-19. But above that, just above that, you've got 19-20 at 2.57 million. And I wonder which, there's £1 million difference. I can show you on mine. It's the lower, it's a 2.5. Yeah. It's important that goes in correctly there. So would it be nice if we had that?
You're getting Roger excited.
Other questions. When you were talking about the sites and not getting our percentage, one of the problems I have for next year is the Sudbrook shipyard site, where we got only 5 units, and I had decided to fund another 10. That developer has now walked away from the Housing Association, even though they offered him $1 million. So it's getting very difficult to even. I do try, if we don't get the houses, if they're a good quality builder, I will try to buy some more if I've got grant available, but that's even getting difficult now.
Thank you, Chair.
Right, is there anything, anybody else want to come in at all? I think we'd just like to, I mean, basically, if we can move the recommendations, which is to approve the contents of the programme, but we've also added the point about talking to the RSL, or registered social landlords, about the possibility of looking at developments in the high street and affordable housing there. So if we could add that to the recommendations as well, if you're all happy with that. And the other thing I'd like to say is, you know, on behalf of the committee, thank you very much for the work that you do in this area, and you've been complimented on a number of occasions by responses from councillors. And so if we can move on to the next report now, which is the rural allocations policy, and I believe that's you again, Shirley Wigham. You've got a full day today. Thank you.
The next report before you is to approve changes to the rural allocations policy. The rural allocations policy, as it was proving very difficult to administer and was leading to a lot of confusion during the allocation process. And in some cases, it was leading to households being allocated a property when they didn't actually have any housing need. The old policy was based solely on local connection and didn't really consider housing need. So the main changes that we've made are to the criteria to make it simpler and to make it fairer, to make sure that they are going to the people we intended them to go to. And also, once we've established the local connection, we will base it then on housing need, which is what we should really be doing. We did have a situation in Raglan, just to give you an example, where someone met the local allocation, the local criteria. They had had a new house from charter housing some years before. They just fancied another new house, and they were able to move, and they had no need whatsoever. But they did meet the criteria, so there was nothing that we could do. So we have put in another paragraph so that if you are adequately housed in that area, then you can't even bid for a property because you're not in any need. So those are the main changes. We've also brought it in line with the LDP hierarchy, with what's considered rural settlement and what's not.
Right, thank you for that. Any questions? Yeah, Councillor Grucott.
Thank you, Chair. I'd just like to say that I fully support the removal of communities in the Abergavenny area, certainly, from the definition of rural. When you look at places like Llanfoist, it's got 3 bus routes going through it. It's got a supermarket there. It's an extension of Abergavenny. The same with Mardy at the north end of Abergavenny. To actually say these are rural communities, when if you travel from here to Chepstow, then you'll see rural communities, and those bits that. Sorry for the people who live there and are fiercely proud of their community, but they are increasingly extensions of Abergavenny, and I think it's only right that they've been removed from a definition of rural. So I fully support that.
We were careful with Llanfoist that we didn't include the whole of Llanfoist Vawr because Gavilan and Llanellan are still rural, so we did make that distinction.
Anyone else like to come in? Councillor Pratt and then Councillor Woodhouse, thank you.
Can I just ask a question, which is a bit of a selfish question, but it really does go with sort of the last point as well, the last subject. my ward of Llanelli Hill, there's 2 estates at the top there, MHA housing. I think some is Mellon Homes as well. Anyway, there seems to be, some of them seem to have been sold off, and it is very difficult in my area for local people to afford properties. So are there properties available in Llanelli Hill for local families to be able to stay in that area?
Llanelli Hill isn't covered by this policy. It's covered by the Brecon Beacons National Park policy, which is our old policy. So yes, they would go to local people. New builds would go to local people. The policy doesn't cover historic build. It's only new since we introduced the policy. But Brecon Beacons National Park do have what they call the local lettings policy, and they've refused to update it, so it's as ours was many years ago.
Thank you very much. And I mean, I have a very difficult relationship with Brecon Beacons National Park, and you know, I have a great concern about local people because, unfortunately, the properties in Llanelli Hill are being sold off and they're not being replaced, and the price of properties is increasing at a great rate. I mean, two properties were sold each side of where I live on Llanelli Hill, both small cottages, and they've both been sold to people from Bristol who are commuting. So, you know, the whole area is changing, and sadly, local people are not able to stay there. But it's a great shame that you're not responsible for Llanelli Hill.
Councillor Woodhouse, please.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you for the report. Just one little observation which might have made it a little bit easier for us when we were going through it. If there could have been a link or a reference to where to find the existing policy, it was just trying to compare the two would have been useful when we were going through the revised one. So you've actually summarised well this morning the changes, which I was trying to draw out by comparing the two, but there aren't really that many changes. It's just that the ones that you've made are quite substantial, aren't they? Really? Thank you.
Yes, please. Yeah.
One of the changes we made, because we always meant for the policy to allow children who were born and brought up in an area to be able to return because they've left, because there were no houses. And we had the first two criteria were living there now and have lived there for 5 years, and had lived there for 5 years in the past. We found that the people who are living there now, who local people may not consider local, but they met that criteria, but they'd come from elsewhere, were getting houses above people who had lived there for 30 years but had to move away because there were no houses. So we've brought that all into one now, so that's living there at any time for 5 years, whether it's now or in the past, and that was one of the main changes. The other changes to the criteria were just to make the policy more manageable when you were actually allocating.
Has anyone else any more questions? If not, I'll come in with a couple of questions. I think the point that Councillor Woodhouse made was about it as actually seeing what the changes were. And I noticed on page 86 and page 87, there are those in bold print, and I wondered if the first point that you made about affordable housing inadequately housed was the first bold point on page 86, and then there's another one which gives discretion to the Common Housing Register Operational Subgroup and Housing and Communities Manager on basically individual cases that warrant special consideration. And then on page 87 there's also one about within 7 working days of an offer being made by the registered social landlord. I was a little bit concerned about that because you know, it's not always easy to get a school or another organisation to reply to you within 7 working days to provide the evidence that you need. And I'm not sure whether all of those. I know that the second point hasn't been changed because I looked at the old LDP, and it also had this discretion about cases that warranted special consideration. So I know that's not a change, but is the first bold point the change, and what about the third bold point? Thank you.
The first bold point is a change, but they're not in bold to indicate changes. They're in bold so that our RSL partners will not make a mistake, because they have been allocating wrongly, some of them, because they're not reading the policy properly. So all of the stuff in bold is for them to take note that they should be doing it in that way. With regard to the 7 working days, our allocations policy is actually 5 working days, and I had to fight to get that extra 2 days.
So just to follow on from that, do you think 7 working days is too short a period? Because I noticed when I looked at the LDP, the original policy that's in the supplemental planning guidance dated 2017, it was much more loose with regard. There didn't seem to be specific time periods. So when did that actually come in, and does it operate okay in practice, or what are your views on it?
There were no time periods in the old one, as you say. This is something that the housing associations have pushed for, because they have to allocate the properties within a certain time, and all of the other properties that they allocate that are not through this policy, they do it in 5 days, and they wanted to only give them 5 days. But I did say, well, it's a rural area, they've got to maybe go to the community council or whatever, that I wanted some more, and they did finally agree to 7. But we haven't used this policy yet, obviously, because it's not been approved. So we'll look at, that's one of the things we will look at. Do people have enough time to get the evidence? But they do manage to get the evidence within 5 days for all the other allocations. So I don't know if you...
Yeah, do you want to come back in? Thank you.
I don't think there's any concerns there. I think the RSLs are monitored on their empty properties, so the regulator looks at them. From a service delivery perspective, obviously they don't want to lose rent. Their loss is our loss, and I say that it's standard practice for people to have to provide verification prior to an allocation. So I just wouldn't have any concerns about that at all. Really, I think it's I think most every now and again there's the odd one, the odd person, household that may have a little bit of difficulty, but again we'll provide support around that if they needed to prove their identity, for example.
Yes, certainly, yeah.
One more thing that is new. It is confusing for the RSLs because it only applies to new properties. So sometimes they get confused as which properties does it apply to, and they ring me to say, is it this or is it that? Or sometimes they do it incorrectly. So that's why we have put a list of the actual schemes that the policy applies to, and we will keep that up to date. Every time we do a new rural scheme, we'll circulate a new list to the RSLs to make sure that they are allocating in the way they should.
Well, unless anybody else from the committee wants to come back on that, I think we'll move that as approved. I mean, is there any concern about the 7 working days, or are you happy with that? You happy? Yeah. Okay then. So the recommendation is basically to consider the need and benefits for rural communities. This is on point 2. So if we're happy on page 83 to approve that, then we'll finish this report. Thank you. Sorry, did you want to say something? No. Okay, thank you. Oh yeah, sorry. And Hazel wanted to come in, yeah.
It is kind of tangential, but because you've kind of discussed references to the LDP a couple of times today, just to let you know that Economy and Development Select Committee are kind of leading on the scrutiny of the LDP, which will be much earlier engagement with members. They're going to be setting up a series of workshops, and they'd like to lead that themselves as a committee, but invite all members to those. So when we do set those up, keep your eyes open. I'll be emailing you all, and I think it would be really useful if members of this committee, particularly with your responsibilities around housing, would be really welcome and interested. I think you'd be interested to take part. The Cabinet member was present at the meeting on Friday where we scrutinised the planning committee arrangements and the performance of the function, and we did discuss brief mentions to the LDP, and that's where they set up that group. So just keep your eyes open for that. Thanks.
Sorry, Councillor Harris, did you want to say something?
Just on that one, Hazel, it really is important that members do engage very early on, because there's nothing worse than having lots of discussions and you get to the end and somebody pops in and says, I'm not having that. They've got no idea what they're talking about. So it really is important that members do know how serious the setting up the LDP is.
Yes, thank you. If we'll move on to the minutes now, which is on page 107. Yes, just to say thank you very much to Ian and Shirley for giving those reports. Thank you. So if we start at, we're looking at accuracy on page 107. This is the minutes of the Joint Select Committee on the 7th of September. So if I go through it page by page, if you've got anything you want to raise, 107, 108, 109, 110, 111, 112, 113, 114, 115, 116, which is the end of that meeting. Is there anything anybody wants to raise on accuracy, or are we happy to approve those minutes? Okay. Did you want to say something, Hazel? Sorry.
Just that I've checked with Richard. Richard was attending that meeting, and there were no clear actions, but it was very much focused on the LDP, and I've just referred to the action of the Select Committee. They're going to be taking this forward and inviting you. So that was a joint meeting, and you can expect to be invited to those discussions, okay?
Okay, thank you. So if we move on to the minutes on item 8B, which is on page 117. This is the Adults Select Committee on the 11th of September. So going through on accuracy, page 117, 118, 119, 120, 121. I wanted to actually add a slight amendment to 121, because I think when there's a bullet point at the end there under 2 where it says the Health Board, including Chief Executive Judith Padgett, should return to a future meeting to provide more information on generic services. I think we said that was in relation to Chepstow Hospital, although did other people think it was in relation to hospitals in general, or not? Because obviously you were at the meeting. Was Abergavenny mentioned as well or not? No. I think it was largely on Chepstow Hospital. So if we could just add that point on generic services at Chepstow Hospital, that's on page 121.
Sorry, the last bullet point covers the Grange. The new hospital.
Oh yes, it does. Yeah, that's fine. Yeah. So if we go to page 122, 123, 124. So if you're all happy, we'll approve those minutes, and if you have a happy subject to that additional amendment, okay. Thank you. So thank you. So if we now come to the forward work programme, and I'll pass that over to Hazel.
As that happens with every forward work programme, it changes between your agenda dispatch and today's meeting. It's constantly changing. The main thing for you to be aware of is that this Friday we have a workshop for this committee. You should all have had the email about it. Yes. And hopefully you will all be here. No. No. It's at 10. Yeah. Okay. Basically, it's a workshop with Mr. Bakewell to discuss options to meet the requirements of the Gypsy and Traveller Needs Assessment. This one we've been asked to convene just for you yourselves, smaller group of members to look in depth at some options. It shouldn't be a very, very long workshop, but I look forward to seeing you, most of you, on Friday. I'll send out a reminder after today's meeting for those that aren't here, Chair. And then your next, you've got a special meeting on the 26th of November. So this is additional to the diaried meetings. And that was called primarily to look at the Quick Rose business case. That's return of that business case, which has been ongoing for some time. You've scrutinised that before. A report from Mr. Bakewell on regional homelessness strategy, the housing register, Ian again, and the report that you would have had today, but it wasn't ready, unfortunately, from Shirley, which was the local housing market assessment. So similar faces to today. Now that meeting is probably going to be quite a lengthy one, Chair, because you've got 4 items on that agenda, but I think they all kind of need to come in that month, because if they wait until your next regular meeting, which is the 18th of December, some of those were subject to decision making before Christmas. So I think if it's okay with you, you might have a long meeting on the 26th, long being maybe a couple of hours, and you might need to have a break. There's nothing else to mention at this point, Chair, other than January is reserved for budget scrutiny. You'll need the whole meeting to go through the budget scrutiny, and anything that's come out of today or your previous meeting I'll add to the work programme, and we'll build that in accordingly. Okay.
Okay. Councillor Woodhouse, did you want to say something?
Yes, thank you, Chair. I think with going back to this Gypsy and Traveller Assessment, the workshop, which is, as you pointed out, is on Friday, is it worth, before these sessions go ahead, checking numbers? Because, I mean, Fridays, I know, aren't the most convenient of days for a lot of people. I think because we have meetings Monday to Friday, anything else we tend to put in our diaries for Friday. So I think you might find the turnout is not going to be that good. Is it worth this is just an example. I have been to some sessions where we haven't had a good response. So I think rather than go with a few numbers, it might be worth considering a system whereby you check how many people can attend before you go ahead.
I don't actually set these up myself. This is done by our Democratic Services function, but it's certainly something that I will suggest to them, that they perhaps need to contact members individually and assess the viability of these things. With that in mind, Chair, are you wanting to proceed on Friday, or do you think you would prefer to defer for a couple of weeks, a week or two? But I think this is something that is relatively time sensitive.
I think Councillor Pratt just wanted to say something first. Thank you.
Yes, I mean, this is a really important issue, and I don't even know, I was involved with this on my previous council, and I don't even know whether we have a policy, and we've certainly got to address this because we've got demands from this community to have sites and we haven't got any. And I think members really need to appreciate the sense of urgency that is around this. So I think it would be a very poor state of affairs if we didn't have a good turnout, because it is something that is going to affect us all, and we've got to have a policy moving forward as a council to address this. And I think that if people aren't going to come, then it has to be reconvened, really, because you need to have a good attendance, because presumably we're going to put together a policy as a council following this.
Councillor Harris.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I can't see where the email came out, but regarding the policy, that's the whole point of these discussions now, for us to formulate in these discussions what we would like to see. It then gets put together by the relevant people in the planning department, and it comes to full council. It's a long, drawn-out process, and I can tell you the last one, the meeting lasted nearly 12 hours when we finally decided it was exhausting. When did the email go out? I can't find it.
It was sent by Nicola Perry.
Nicola, okay,
I believe it was booked about 2 weeks ago. I think there is a bit of a sense of urgency with this one. It's kind of a little bit tangential to the policy, which will come before you soon anyway. This is to discuss a certain set of sort of circumstances. So I think it's equally important that members can be there. So if you would wish us to kind of defer, I don't think we'd have a massive window to defer it. We'd be looking at maybe a week or so later than now. I mean, would that help members?
It was sent out with the economy development agenda.
Is it? Can I just clarify? Is it for just members of this committee, or is it in general? Yeah, I mean, so really, if it's going to be for members of this committee, then it's important to know who thinks they'll be able to attend this Friday. Is this Friday? Is it? Yeah, this Friday. Do we know at this stage? Councillor Harris, will you be available?
Should be able to chair. I might be a little bit late, but I don't think so.
I think sorry. Carry on, Councillor.
Such an important issue. Really, it should be an all-member workshop.
I agree. I've just said that.
It's a promoted issue, and it's whatever policy comes out of this is going to have far-reaching implications, and it's important that we get it right. And I think, really, it should be an all-member seminar.
Okay, just to clarify, future scrutiny of the policy we can open up. I think this was due to a particular set of circumstances which I can't go into right now. So that's why this was set up. It was sent to you on Friday the 12th. So about 2 weeks ago. But if you would prefer to defer, if you feel that certain members of this committee are not going to be able to be here, because we're already 3 down today, so we don't know about their availability, that it would be difficult, I suppose, to proceed with 3. But as I say, there is some sense of urgency with this. Are there any particular days next week that you're all here and that you would prefer to do this?
Chair, I've got nothing for Friday, or whenever it was, the 12th.
It was sent on the 12th, but it's for Friday the 26th.
Yeah, but I haven't got anything from the 12th, that's what I'm saying. Can you send it to me, please?
My feeling would be to... it's not looking at the policy in general. My understanding is it's looking at a specific matter that needs some urgent attention. So from that point of view, I mean, looking at the diary, it's half term the week after, and then the week after there's quite a lot to do with the World War I celebration. So if we're not careful, we're not going to get a meeting at all. So I think I would suggest that we carry on with the meeting on Friday. I mean, unless you want to throw it open to economy as well, do you think? Or would you prefer... Oh, it's for the remit of this committee. So if you're happy, we'll carry on then, unless anybody really objects, because otherwise I can see us ending up being in December if we're not careful.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I mean, I can't be here. I'd already agreed I'll be out of county looking after one of my grandchildren on Friday, and I'll be dead meat if I'm not there.
Safer to come here.
But certainly, I mean, I'd like to be present, but it's more important if there's a specific need that's met, and I'll just have to send my apologies, and hopefully you'll get a quorum.
Is that it there? No, she's presented.
There's been stuff from Debbie as chair as well about it.
Okay, so I think we'll leave it as it is, just because it's not the general policy, it's just a specific issue, and you know, hopefully we can go through some issues then. So if we can, is that the end of the forward work programme? Is there anything else we want to add?
There's nothing else to raise on the forward work programme, Chair, and the Cabinet and Council forward planner is there for your information, should there be anything in there that you would wish to bring forward for this committee.
The other aspect I'd like to read out to everybody is that myself and Councillor Pratt went to have a meeting in relation to the report on the A to Z social care system of records. Councillors Jane Pratt and I were grateful to Julia Boothroyd, who was the head of adult services, now the director, for arranging this meeting with a number of service managers and the lead systems analysis. There has been an integrated approach to the care service since about 208-ish. I mean, this is to do obviously with the computer records that they hold in social care. Since about 5 to 7 years ago, integration of record sharing included district nurses and community psychotherapists. 3 years ago, a flow record system started. There are information sharing protocols with the health board. The system provides access to records listed under their own worker names and job titles, such as social workers, occupational health, physiotherapists. Underneath this system is an A to Z of records held on an S drive. The S drive files come from manual files being placed on the computer system. In comparison, the health service still has a number of manual file records. There are 3,381 people on the system across all services. And when you, so that you can go into this, sorry, Councillor Harris, could you turn off your mic?
Sorry.
The caseload per person is an average of 20. The S drive covers legacy and new information and is an everyday system and the prime source of records. In terms of a paper trail, the network drives are not the best system for a document management system, but operate across the council. There are 750,000 documents off the network drive into the SharePoint. The access to this A to Z system of adult social care records operates based on trust, with induction training of staff and signing of confidentiality agreements. In Councillor Brown's opinion, the main disadvantage of the system is that it lacks a proper computer trail. Whilst ease of access on an A to Z system of all names may help in healthcare, it would be better if it had a computer-generated document management monitoring system to monitor access to social care records and did not rely solely on staff trust and staff confidentiality agreements. In Councillor Pratt's opinion, the advantage of easy access to records outweighs the small risk of data breaches. It is important in the current system to ask managers to keep records and monitor new staff and ensure that induction is given at the outset to any access and includes signed confidentiality agreements, and not to access any data before having received this training and unless relevant to the persons under their care. It is also important to ensure that all current staff have up-to-date training in this area, have all signed and abide by confidentiality codes. Under the GDPR, there is no longer a need for consent, but adults with social care records have a right to be informed of the purposes of data collection and a right to restrict it. In terms of any restriction, Councillor Pratt comments that patients can ask for certain information to be restricted if they wish, but this may have implications for their level of care. And then we looked at the situation of how long records are kept, but this depends on the situation. So children's records are kept for longer, but it can vary. It could be 6 years, 4 years, 6 years, 3 years or 15 years, depending on the legal requirements for record keeping. There is an all-Wales system called the Welsh Community Care Information System, which is in short form the WCCIS, which 8 or 9 of the 22 Welsh authorities have moved into. In terms of the future, the WCCIS has a more robust document management system with one e-file per person, but it is not a shared record for health and the local authority. In terms of this Adult Select Committee report back, we would want further report backs to the committee from the director who is on the CCIS board as to how we improve our system in the future on the document management side. It would also be helpful if Councillors Pratt and Brown could visit an authority with a WCCIS in place and report back. I mean, basically this was to do, if you remember, about the system whereby we have these manual records that we access in healthcare situations on an A to Z basis, such as at Sevenview Care Home, and basically there isn't a computer trail of the access to personal records, but it's based upon trust and the staff signing confidentiality records, whereas the WCCIS system has a more robust trail so that you can see on a computer basis whether somebody's been into a record or not. So that's just a summary of it. Councillor Pratt, did you want to add anything else?
Yeah, thank you very much, Chair, for putting that report together and for communicating it, because this is a really serious issue. And I think also it highlights the problem that we have as a county in that because we're so strapped for cash, we don't have the resources to put money into the latest up-to-date technology, which would obviously improve the system. And I think that is really a concern of mine, having spent the day there. And whilst, as you said, I'm happy with the system as it is, because I think we've got to look at the risk as opposed to, you know, the cost of what we're doing. In an ideal world, we would be investing money to improve the system that we have. And I would welcome the opportunity to go and see the more secure system with you elsewhere.
Does anybody else want to comment on this particular issue? No. Did we have any feedback, Hazel, from social services on our suggestions?
Yes, Chair, we had some feedback yesterday that Julie Boothroyd, who is our new Chief Officer for Social Care and Safeguarding and Health, she is on the WCCIS board that you've referred to, and Julie has confirmed that they're progressing with the idea that Monmouthshire would join that system. There's a few issues that need to be ironed out, particularly around financing and so forth. They've said that they're happy to arrange a visit for councillors to see the system in operation elsewhere. So I don't know if it would just be you two again, or if you wanted to extend that to others. But we could arrange that visit, and then I think it would be worthwhile you having then a report back to this committee on how it's progressing with us looking to join that system. And you would then be able to add in your views on having seen it in operation.
So does any other councillors want to join the record chase with myself and Councillor Pratt?
As you're both involved, that you carry on with this on our behalf.
Okay, thank you. So if we move on to the next item, which is the Council and Cabinet Business Forward Work Programme on page 129. So do you want to speak on that, Hazel, please?
Yes, that's provided there for the committee for information purposes, but the purpose really is for you to know what's coming forward, so that if you would like to bring any of those items through for pre-decision scrutiny, you could do so. You would also be well within your rights as a member to contact any of those officers should you just want a little more information about any of those topics, rather than perhaps direct scrutiny through this committee. But we're working working on trying to sort of improve the timeliness of the planner and make sure that it's populated earlier with items for decisions. So, you know, if you can keep your eyes out, and if there's anything that you would want to see, you can ask and we can get you that report. Or if there's anything particularly that you think that we've missed in terms of our work programme, then please just get in touch with me.
Anybody, any comment on it? No, I had a look through and I couldn't see anything, you know, of particular relevance to adults. Unless anybody else can, I think we'll move on. Okay. So I think that's the end of the. Unless there's any other issues to raise, no. Okay. So I'm looking forward to seeing all of you who can make it for the meeting on Friday. Thank you.